This video is brought to you by Captivating History. Students of history are usually familiar with the historian's desire to neatly compartmentalize the human race's story. We like to break down the past into neat little chunks that make it easier to study, compare, and track progress, as in the chapters of a book. However, novice historians may be a little confused by the label Early Modern Europe. Geographically, thankfully, we are clear. We are talking about continental Europe. But early and modern seem to be strange qualifiers. It is somewhat dispiriting that the American historian Jack Goldstone actually calls it a wholly meaningless term. But it is widely used to denote a time between medieval and modernity, between the Middle Ages and the Industrial Age. Therefore, historians try to differentiate this time period as different from the medieval area that went before, but preceding the changes during the Industrial Revolution to come after. Hence, the messy term Early Modern Europe. Roughly speaking, we are addressing the years between the late 15th century and the late 18th century. Regardless of the persisting problems of periodization, Europe underwent numerous transitions during this time. Whether we are talking about the Reformation, the Renaissance, or the rise of rationalism, Europe experienced fundamental changes in society, religion, ideas, and everyday life. Pinpointing a start date can be helpful. Many historians use the invention of the first European movable type printing process in 1450 by Gutenberg as a beginning point for the early modern period in Europe. Movable type allowed individual characters to be arranged to form words, making the written word more accessible to vast swaths of European populations. This is a natural starting point for historians, as it helps to frame the importance of the spreading of ideas in shaping the following centuries. Thanks to the printing press, new and influential works by the likes of Martin Luther, Thomas More, and Nicholas Machiavelli were broadly read, discussed, and dwelled upon in a way that wasn't possible before this invention. Martin Luther himself often features early in any curriculum content for early modern Europe. That's because the Reformation narrative usually begins with the pinning of his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Church in Germany in 1517. Martin Luther and his followers were voicing their anger at perceived corruption within the Catholic Church, specifically criticizing the practice of indulgences. This initiated the Great Schism within Christendom, changing the religious landscape of Europe for the coming centuries. Along with other Protestant reformers such as John Calvin and Huldrych Zwingli, Martin Luther led movements that questioned the Church's authority but progressed to address theological doctrinal issues. Ideas such as sola fide, by faith alone, and sola scriptura, by scripture alone, insisted that the Bible was the only authority for Christian practice and that salvation lies solely in belief. These ideas were transformative and sowed division as several denominations of Protestant doctrine emerged, including Lutherans, Calvinists, Anglicanism, and Anabaptists, all with different interpretations in how to practice their faith. It is difficult to understand the significance the Reformation played in European people's lives, not least because of the warfare that resulted as countries became affiliated with either Protestantism or Catholicism, leading to religious conflicts. The most significant of these was the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, ending with the Peace of Westphalia. Centered around the Holy Roman Empire and states that make up modern-day Germany and Central Europe, the conflict was initiated with Ferdinand II's ascension to head of state of the Holy Roman Empire. A strident Catholic, Ferdinand attempted to impose his faith on his subjects, contradicting the Peace of Augsburg Treaty from the previous century. There was an early attempt to enshrine certain religious freedoms. Many German regions were governed by Protestant princes and rejected Ferdinand's authority to impose religious laws upon their domains, providing the spark for a prolonged conflict. Over the next 30 years, much of Central Europe became embroiled in the war, with Habsburg pro-Catholic states fighting in several arenas against the northern Protestant provinces and the Scandinavian states. The war was a complex struggle, and historians often point to the stunning lack of diplomacy as a factor for the brutal and continual nature of the destruction. As the war continued, its reasoning became less about the initial religious schism and more about how Europe would be governed in the aftermath. Whatever the reasons and ambitions of the leadership, the lasting impact on Central Europe's people was catastrophic. It is estimated that around 30% of the entire German population died during the conflict. These deaths were not just direct victims of the battles. They were victims of the disease and famine that afflicted the region as armies decimated their way through the land. Ultimately, the conflict ended with the Peace of Westphalia, which reinstated the Peace of Augsburg. All states agreed to uphold the principle that the prince had the right to determine his domain's religion, but there would also be freedom of worship for all faiths during allotted times and at will in private. The lasting impact of the peace is difficult to assess. However, historians claim that in the wake of the 30 Years' War, Catholic states essentially gave up on attempting to reclaim land for their true faith. This ideological quest became less important as a more modern sense of realpolitik took over, as states vied for power, solely for the sake of power. For instance, the CounterReformation took on a different tone as Catholics looked to the international scale for converts with the work of societies like the Jesuits. This marked a sharp change from the Inquisition policies that sought to root out and harshly punish heresy throughout Europe. The religious makeup of Europe was a broad spectrum of faiths, and across the continent, different narratives surfaced involving conflicts, appeasements, uprisings, and persecution. Nevertheless, over this period, the story concerns a more accepting stance on freedom of religion. Another running theme through the early modern period of Europe is the pursuit of knowledge, though this takes many forms. One manifestation of this comes in another label, the Age of Discovery. With Columbus's landing on Hispaniola in 1492, so began an age of discovery in which the states of Europe raced to explore and claim new lands for their own. From Dutch and Portuguese traders establishing outposts in Southeast Asia to the Spanish conquest of the Americas, Europeans began an ever-increasing engagement with the broader world. Though the accumulation of wealth was, of course, the primary motivation, a curiosity at the heart of expansionism is characteristic of the time. The establishment of new trade routes brought new materials and luxurious items to Europe, and the often exploitative nature of European imperialism also brought colossal wealth to those involved. However, this often came at the expense of colonized populations, as indigenous people were often subject to overwork, massacres, and were vulnerable to European diseases. Also, the popularity of new products like sugar and cotton led to the need for massive plantations, contributing to the trade of enslaved peoples. This contradiction is a reminder that the benefits stemming from the Age of Discovery came with a dark mark against European states. Progress in fields such as mapmaking, navigation, botany, and the more general spreading of ideas via books and the more ease of travel came at a considerable price for some. Coinciding with Europeans' great desire to explore and expand their horizons, there was a gradual questioning of the status quo. Philosophers and scientists alike began to analyze society's norms and found that the facts of life did not always stand up to rational examination. Collectively, these earned the label of Enlightenment thinkers, and they formed the foundation of study for another label, the Age of Reason. Covering a broad array of scientific and philosophic innovations, the Enlightenment built upon Renaissance principles, literally meaning a rebirth, and constitutes ambitious attempts to rethink the world's ways completely. Though individual Enlightenment thinkers had different approaches, they unanimously held the ambitious belief that humanity could be improved by instituting rational change. From Rousseau's insights in the social contract to John Locke's essay concerning human understanding, thinkers engaged in dialogue across Europe that questioned the authority of absolute monarchies. The scientific discoveries of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica and the works of natural philosophers such as Galileo Galilei helped usher in a wave of scientific progress, a scientific revolution based on a new, advanced understanding of the scientific method. Again, the widespread impact of Enlightenment thinking cannot be understated. Whereas history can be assessed in terms of causes and effects of events, the study of changes in mentality needs to take a longer view. A straight line can be drawn from the Enlightenment's early questioning texts to the Declaration of Independence written by Thomas Jefferson and the text surrounding the French Revolution. These two cataclysmic events shook the European world of absolute monarchy and paved the way for the modern nation-state building Napoleonic era. It is around the time of these two revolutions that historians indicate the shift to modernity. The monumental political change and the increasing mechanization of industry are deemed significant enough to constitute a shift to a new era. Breezing through a period of 300 years that warrants much further study is a challenge. It is essential to reflect on the lives of the ordinary people of Europe to understand the transformative changes. It is easy to get lost in kings and queens' decisions, in heady philosophical texts, and in the intrigues of war and diplomacy. A European peasant in 1500 lived in a religiously uniform feudal society based on handicrafts. He lived in a decentralized kingdom entirely controlled by a political elite and had little knowledge of the outside world. By 1800, he lived in a capitalist world fueled by mechanized industry. He had the freedom to worship whatever he chose and may have had notions of his natural rights and popular politics. He now knew a whole new continent, of many scientific discoveries, and probably considered himself a patriot of a burgeoning nation-state. To learn more about early modern Europe, then check out our book, Early Modern Europe, a captivating guide to the period in European history with events such as the 30 Years' War and the Salem witch hunts, and political powers such as England and the Ottoman Empire. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook for free while still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.